Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests will tell their story with the help of 12 questions in just 30 minutes. I'm your host, Mike Solitro, and we are very excited to speak with Jorma Kirkko. Jorma is from the UK and has lived in several countries, speaks several languages passably. Something of a nomad, dividing his time between Turkey, Scotland, and Greece with his American wife. Currently is the co-host of the Blackmilkshake Pubcast. This pubcast is a feast of fun in magazine format from an Istanbul pub, packed with sketches, pop nostalgia, special guests, and general fun. Jorma, welcome. I'm really happy to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks very much, Mike. I love the introduction. It almost sounds like I wrote it myself.
You know, perhaps you had a hand in it, but you've lived most of it, I would think. Let's start at the end there, just to clarify for anybody who may not know, what is a black milkshake?
A black milkshake is actually it's a bit of a euphemism for a pint of Guinness.
Okay.
And we have a podcast. Originally, there was a website, a Facebook page. There is a Facebook page that my friend and partner Ray runs called Blackmilkshake, which is he styles it as a virtual pub, a place where you can go for the pub atmosphere, but of course at your keyboard and not drinking instead. Just a happy place. And we decided to make this into a podcast earlier last year. Now it's January, isn't it? In May. And we decided to try to recreate the page on air. And halfway through the first one, we kept saying podcast, and we realized that as we were recording in a pub, in the upstairs room in a pub, that we should call it the pubcast. And that kind of stuck after that.
So that was actually my follow-up question. So you did invent the term pubcast then. Are you taking credit for that?
I'm going to take credit for it. I thought I was hugely original until I Googled it, and I found out that there are at least 4 other podcasters in Ireland who call themselves the Pubcast. So not as original as I thought, but it's okay.
I'm going to go with very original because you are the originator to me as hearing it, so I will give you credit there. But talk about it. It's a different format where it's not just audio. There's multiple pieces. How did you come to that? How is that working? And how difficult is it to put together?
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, I mean, we do mainly do audio, but I also produce videos every day, promo videos. I'll explain the format of what we do. We do a 45-minute show once a month. We tend to split that roughly between an interview with similar format to this, and some sketches and some banter and games. The original idea for the banter and the games was so that it would actually be like 2 friends talking in a pub, which sometimes it is, and sometimes we cheat and we do it on Zoom, and we dub in the clinking of glasses, but that's a secret. We won't tell anyone that.
Secret safe.
Yeah, so we mix. We do the interview, as I say, it's similar to this, but we tend to split the interview into 4-minute sections in between other things. I would call it a variety show in a lot of ways. We do very silly sketches. Some of them are me doing silly voices. Sometimes we may have celebrity characters like Liam Neeson, for example, where we borrow bits of his audio from various things that he's on, and then manage to fit them into a ridiculous script, usually where I end up chastising him for his outrageous behavior.
Okay. That's an excellent description. And I mean, I couldn't help but laugh. So well done. And I think that, in all seriousness, most podcasts go for the 2 people sitting next to each other in a pub having a conversation. So that's great that's your starting point. The sketch piece, that's where I think it can go either very well or very poorly. I think that's difficult to pull off in general, let alone in the audio format. I love the borrowed audio of Liam. Is there a voice you'd be willing to share with us today?
Well, I don't do Liam Neeson's voice myself, but one of the features that we also do is we have a a South African character who originally started off as and he can't remember if the word is astronomer or astrologist, so he often calls himself an astrolomer. And he sometimes solves people's personal problems in a very practical and overly male way. And yes, Hansi kind of talks like this, and a lot of the time when people try to write in with the problem, he ends up trying to sell one of his family's products to them. And it's a lot of it is a parody of problems that that you read in magazines or in tabloid papers, where my girlfriend and I are extremely happy. I'm 26, she's 24. Quite recently, I noticed, though, that she had a fascination with my uncle. And, all of this kind of thing. What should I do? And Hansi comes up with ridiculous advice. In our most recent episode, somebody suggested that they had a problem. Well, it wasn't a problem, but they were very attracted to a girl at work and enjoyed the conversation, and were considering, wanted to know how to make the move to the next level. And would it be the right decision to photocopy a part of his anatomy? And Hansi gave excellent advice, which said, under no circumstances would I recommend that you photocopy your penis, because photocopiers transmit UVB rays and they can damage the soft skin very much. And it's that kind of thing, Might be the right advice, but it's for the wrong reason.
There you go. Yeah, that's well illustrated of the kind of sketches and bits that you'll do. So thank you for walking us through that. What is if you could take us, what's the scene in the pub like? Do people expect the shows coming on? Do you have a booth? Are people trying to get on air? What are they doing?
Right, this is a massive pub. It's called James Joyce Irish Pub in the centre of Istanbul, and it's where Ray and I met several years ago. And it's this old grand hotel. So the pub probably has 3 or 4, maybe 5 stories.
Wow.
So there's a bar on the ground floor, which is huge, and then there's a bar upstairs, and there are various rooms which are sometimes used as music session rooms, sometimes used as musicians' changing rooms. Sometimes on a very busy day, they're used for discos or sports or something like that. And they give us a room where we're not going to disturb anybody, really, because, as you know yourself, sound is very, very sensitive. And initially, we did try to record in the main bar room, but it wasn't possible at all. There's just too much interference, and you learn the techniques. You can clean some of it off, and sometimes it sounds nice and authentic. But no, we do it in a quiet room. But it's a beautiful, beautiful room with a very high ceiling, and it's just one of those places that's full of history. And as we go along, the bar staff come up when they see that we've got empty glasses, and they help us with a pint of black milkshake here and there.
That's very kind of them. And you're certainly right that the energy from the main bar room would be fantastic, as well as the anecdotes from what's happening, but the noise and the volume would just be too difficult given the format. So you mentioned you met Ray at the bar. Was this a chance encounter? Were you planning to meet him, or what happened there?
No, total chance encounter. It was around 5 years ago, and my wife and I hadn't been in Istanbul for very long. And we called in, we'd been doing some shopping in the centre of town, called into the pub. There was a game of football on. We were sitting there watching it, and went up to the bar to get our drinks. And then when we came back, strange looking man with red hair was sitting smiling to himself in my wife's seat. And as often happens in these situations, my wife said to me, "Don't say anything, I'll find somewhere else to sit." And I said, "Of course not." And, "Excuse me, you're in my wife's seat." And a conversation just struck up immediately. He told me within 10 minutes about Black Milkshake. We started to talk about that, and we just became friends immediately. And but I did think something was in the back of my head about this black milkshake, and I don't know what it was, and it just didn't go away. Yeah, so that was where we met. And we tried to get down there to meet each other. Perhaps we live further away from each other now, but a couple of times a month if we can manage it, and whether we're recording or not. So
very nice. And is the Black Milkshake Virtual Pub, is that still a Facebook page? Is that still going live?
That still is. That
Okay.
still is. Black Milkshake is still on Facebook. It's a very active site. It's I mean, it's fun, it's jokes, it's memes, a bit of sentimentality, occasionally a bit of tourist things about either here or the west of Ireland, where Ray is from. And we also have another Facebook page, a sister page, Black Milkshake the Pubcast. We're also on Instagram and Twitter as well, and that's where we post our videos and things like that. We found out after a while it was easier to keep the two separate, or separate but connected, you know what I mean.
I got it. I'll post links to all of that so our listeners can check that out.
Thanks a lot.
Before I kind of change gears, one last question: has there been any thought to moving or including a Black Milkshake spot in the metaverse? Now that that's a possibility,
you're going to have to explain that one to me a little bit better.
Well, from my very basic understanding of the metaverse is that it is a 3D virtual meeting space of sorts. Some people own rooms, domains. Some people have set up neighborhoods, have property that they own there, quote unquote, and they host events, and everyone has an avatar. They show up, and it's as if you are at the same place in real life. But so that's my limit. So that would be, for a virtual bar, everyone kind of shows up, has their little avatar, and they can interact with each other, sort of like this, but in a 3D-esque setting.
Wow, what a brilliant question. Something I've never thought of, the first time I've ever heard of it. So I'm guessing for the moment the answer is no, but it does sound interesting. Who knows what will happen?
Well, if you set that up, I will figure out how to get into the metaverse and visit you there. So I'll go on record with that promise. But changing gears,
we'll buy you a metaversal pint.
Perfect. Your bio that you may or may not have written mentions living in multiple different countries and even the word nomad. How does one become a nomad?
Well, I mean, nomad, I suppose it's metaphorical, really. I don't walk around with a tent or anything like that. From childhood, really, it started. I moved to France when I was a kid, and moved back to the UK, and I would say found it difficult to settle in many ways. I didn't feel that I was the same as everybody else. And it wasn't that I'd become French in the meantime. It's just I'd seen different things. I'd had different experiences. And as soon as I could, really, I moved abroad. I was 21. I studied abroad for a bit. I worked I did all kinds of jobs in Germany. Do you say tarmac in America? I can't remember. For the black asphalt thing.
For airplanes?
No, tarmac or asphalt on the roads.
The only reference I know to tarmac is that's where an airplane will take off and land from the tarmac.
Okay, all right, but the black oily thing that you make road out of.
Yes.
And so yeah, I did that in Germany with some very choice people, and I worked in a cat food factory. I did all kinds of things until I eventually became a teacher. I'm a qualified teacher. I've sort of flitted all my life between these sort of media and comedy interests and teaching, and often when I've hit a roadblock with the comedy or the media, then teaching's been a nice safe haven. But yeah, I lived in Germany for a number of years, and then ended up moving to Malaysia in Southeast Asia, which was a fantastic thing. I mean, this is the very short version of the story. But my wife has family in Berlin and in Hungary, as well as in the States. And it being in Southeast Asia, that was really, really exciting, but it was just too far away from people. I mean, it would take a day at least on a plane to get to where we wanted to go. But it's just one of those things. I think I've had over 35 addresses, and on the surface, I appear to be quite a stable person. But I mean, there is that background, shaky ground behind me, and it's just, I think after a while, you start to think to yourself, well, I'm relatively comfortable wherever I go, but I don't really know where home is. You get to a place, you make bonds with it, and then sometimes you plan to leave. Sometimes, the universe creates not the metaverse, but the universe this time creates the conditions for you to do so. And yeah, so I'm constantly in a position, I don't know where I'm going to be in a year. I mean, I nearly moved to Bulgaria 2 years ago, nearly moved to Azerbaijan last year. I suppose it might sound a bit strange to some people, but it's the life that I have.
I wouldn't say strange, nor after having a few conversations for you would the word stable come to mind when describing you. So I think that's okay. It wouldn't be one of the top descriptors, I should say. But in moving to and considering future moves, is there something that you're looking for? Is there a baseline requirement, or what would make a new address attractive to you, having had the opportunity to be in so many different places and see so many different things?
I think as you get a bit older, it all becomes tiring. I mean, at one point every year I was itching to move. I still go through the motions every year. Would it be better if, would the grass be greener there? But it's a lot of work. We've currently been in the house that I'm in right now, speaking to you for, I think, 3.5 years. We've got 4 cats in it. Now, having pets, that's almost like having an anchor for a boat. It would be horrendous even having to move to the house next door with them, I can tell you. I think my wife is happy here, so I think we'll ride this out. We have a place in Scotland that we go to on holiday. We have a place in Greece that we go to on holiday. I think one day we're going to try and settle in one of those places. I'm from the UK, of course. Things became a lot more complicated for people like me after Brexit, of course. But yeah, I'm hoping that the big moving days are behind me now. But
so here's my turn. For those who are not as well read up on Brexit, how, in a 2-sentence, can you describe it from somebody who is not involved or somebody who doesn't know what that means, as opposed to, all right, they're not part of the EU anymore, so that's all I know.
Brexit was when the British government decided that they would ask an uninformed public if they wanted to leave the largest trading bloc in the world to risk it in the wild shark-infested oceans. And the majority of people did choose to do that, albeit a very, very small majority, not enough to make a significant constitutional change in my humble view, although many disagree with me. And that for many people who are nothing like me, it doesn't make a lot of difference, except the price of food's gone up. But we can always blame Ukraine and COVID for this as well. But in a couple of years, things have become difficult. It's a lot more difficult to trade. It's a lot more difficult to travel. And a couple of years ago, as a European, which I was born a European, and I ceased to be one, I think about 13 months ago, technically. That means I no longer have the right to live in all the places that I lived in when I was younger and thought that I could choose from forever. So I mean, it's frustrating. It's an obstacle. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's just a bizarre thing that I never ever could have imagined seeing. I don't think you can even translate it to an American audience because it doesn't have that framework anyway, because the US isn't in a network of countries that are supposed to be integrated. You know, America has partnerships with countries, but it's not the same. And this was a wonderful thing of having 28, in my opinion. 20, I'm saying that because not all of our listeners, if they get to hear this, are of the same opinion as me, I know. But 28 countries which collaborated with each other on everything. And then suddenly one of them stopped. So, yeah, a little unfortunate, but we are in Turkey right now, which isn't part of it anyway. So if the very worst comes to the worst, my wife and I will be able to retire here. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the color and the background. You mentioned your wife. Your wife is American. Did you also meet her in a bar, or is there a good story behind that?
No, this is not in a bar. No, actually a bit, slightly. We worked together, and we worked together in Berlin, in Germany, actually, and we'd seen each other a few times, and we'd had a little a bit of a conversation, a little giggle here and there, and ended up going to one of these awful works Christmas parties, you know, where you know that if you don't go, everybody's going to hate you, and if you do go and if you behave like yourself, they're also going to hate you as well. So you end up just thinking, oh God, who can I sit with? And I thought, oh, that nice lady that I've spoken to a few times is over there. I'll go and sit next to her. She's it'll be better than some of the people that I know I don't want to talk to. And it just went from there, really. And we were at similar points in our lives. And yeah, we ended up, I wouldn't say it was a whirlwind romance as such, but it was definitely a whirlwind. And certain circumstances happened within the year where we both found ourselves out of work. Initially, she was out of work, slightly unfairly, in my opinion, and I made my feelings clear on the issue, and then we were both out of work. So,
funny how that works out,
isn't it? Isn't it? But yeah, and that was that. So the first time we actually lived together was in Malaysia. After that, and we haven't been in any trouble since. So.
I don't believe that for a second, but one thing from the I got to pick and choose from the bio what I wanted to share up front, but in all seriousness, one thing that jumped out at me, and I'm going to butcher it, I think, was that with your background and your interests, sociology should have been the career path, but you're put in woodworking class, which I'm sure there's a joke in there, but it stuck out at me because somebody who's had the life experience you had, has the personality that you have, has the listening skills and the observance of what's going on that you have, seems like that would have been a good fit. But, you know, you make the joke there. Is there something that you, looking back, would have liked to have tried professionally, or that kind of you would have stuck on the path that you've taken us down or told us about?
I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I left school. I had two ideas. I had the idea of teaching, and I had the idea of journalism and radio. I ended up doing all three of those. Had the idea of being an author as well, and I've done that too, but that didn't pay. I think I was the first member of my family to go to university, and I was told that when you go to university, your life will be made. So I never gave it much thought after that. I just had one or two ideas, and of course I realized that may have been true in 1960, but it definitely wasn't in the 1990s. So I don't know. I mean, I think to myself, I'm in my late 40s now, and I do think to myself every day, yeah, I would have liked to have been a psychologist. I didn't know what sociology was until my mid-20s. But I think that would have been an interesting thing. I am interested in the social sciences. Yeah, I think though, really, I'm relatively content. I am content with the way that my life has gone. Of course, there are other things that I would have liked to have done. I think, and and I'm sure you're the same. There are things that you would have liked to have done, and I'm sure there are also things that you would be good at that you haven't even tried or thought of. And I think that's the same for all of us. But we only have a very limited amount of time on this earth, don't we? And what I find is that I keep going back to the same things. And at this moment, I've thought to myself, I was 47 when I decided to do this again. I'd not done anything in writing. Oh yeah, I'd written a book, I think, when I was 44, but I'd given up completely on comedy, and I'd given up on the idea of radio, etc., etc. But I don't know, somehow the passion, it can be suppressed, but it never goes away. I'm sure that's something that you understand yourself.
With comedy, I'm going to assume that's what you're talking about, and because I agree with you 100% that I've had the pleasure of living in not nearly as many places as you, but I've had a good number of places I've lived and had the ability to work in many different fields. And while I wouldn't change anything, there are things that worked out well, things that didn't work out as well. But you kind of pick up things in each, and you bring the best along to the next spot. But like yourself, I've always enjoyed a well-written comedy. I think the British do it the best, so I kind of enjoy that sense of humor, the wry kind of joke in between, and always thought that
sometimes with a little darkness thrown in as well.
Yep, that can help. So I always can appreciate good comedy, but I have never looked to do anything professionally with it. But people tell me I'm hilarious all the time, so I get it. But kind
I
of
wasn't
with that,
specifically meaning comedy, actually,
okay.
Mike. I was meaning, I see comedy / radio as something that I was always interested in. I was actually referring to you because you've got a very diverse portfolio, and yet this is something that you're passionate about, which actually has nothing to do with, at least probably what you would put on your CV or your resume.
Yeah, my lifelong goal would be to never have a resume again, and that's a different conversation for a different day. But I have had the chance to do many different things professionally, and hosting the show does not align necessarily with them. But the reason, and I don't know if we had talked about this, the reason that it started for me was I was a guest on many podcasts, and I just got to the point where my story is not exciting. There's nothing amazing here to talk about, but I've met some great people and I love the format. So I would like to shine a spotlight or interview and talk to these folks because I'm pretty good at asking questions, and it's been a lot of fun to be on this side of it. So I'm glad I did it, and that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love being the interviewer as well. I really do. We interview guests every month on our show. And we've had a couple of authors on, a couple of comedians. It's just fantastic hearing about people's lives because people might do something that's similar to what you do, but the way that they came at it is completely different. Their motivations are completely different. A guy who sponsored our most recent show, comedian Bob Hennigan, fantastic guy in Ireland. He pretty much made the decision to go full-time into comedy due to having ADHD, and it just a serious lack of ability, he describes it as, to focus on anything for too long. Every time I talk about this to my wife, she tells me that it sounds just like me, but I'm not as extreme. That's why I always panic at the minute at the beginning of the phone call, because I'm always fiddling with everything. But he decided that he wanted to get into comedy, one, because he's funny, but the other, it's something that he can focus on 100%, but he sees it almost as an educational thing. He wants to talk, his comedy is about ADHD, which I think is great. Some people have a personal journey for things like this. My kind of thing is I prefer to hide behind characters. I don't know why, really. Characters just come into my head. It seems easier. Maybe I don't know, maybe I'm more private than some people, says he on an American podcast talking about his life.
Well, I was just going to say a good interviewer there would follow up and dig in and say, well, why do you think that you're hiding behind characters? And more importantly, why did you choose to describe it that way? But we are not going to go down that path because we are almost at time somehow. But you've talked about a lot of things you've done, you want to do. If you meet somebody the first time, hey, Jorma, what do you do? How do you answer that?
That's one of the occasions where I'm actually very private. I never know what to say, really. I tend to, if they ask me, I tell them what I do. But it's not something I like to talk about too much. I'm quite happy to talk about certain areas of my life, but I suppose there is an insecurity there to an extent that people might not be interested or impressed. So if I act stupid, maybe, and say something, I don't speak as Donald Duck when they ask me what job I do, but I mean, almost playing a certain role at certain times to me is more comfortable than necessarily telling people that I don't want to talk to everything about myself.
I think that's a
There are
fine answer.
questions involved in that as well, aren't there, Dr. Freud? But yeah.
Nope, that's a fine answer. We have covered a good amount of material today. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I probably should have?
I think we've covered what the name of our program is. Not really. I'd just like to say that really, if you want to giggle from two clowns on a unique podcast, please give us a shout on Blackmilkshake the Pubcast. You can find it on we're on Apple, definitely. And we broadcast on Acast. But I think that's covered all of it. I mean, I came in here in a big fluster after being stuck in rain and traffic for 2 hours. So I probably can't think clearly enough anyway, Mike.
I smirked when you said that I come onto the call and I'm all over the place, and I was going to leave it between us how this call started. So I will not say that you came on and we had sound difficulties and we couldn't see each other, we couldn't hear each other. We're not going to talk about that. But I will post all the links to the podcast the /pubcast in the show notes. And thank you very much for joining us. This was a ton of fun.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it too. When will it go out, do you think?
I'll have it live this week. And right on cue, I've lost your audio.